What are the best specs in Phase 3 if you want to do a ton of damage? Open an incognito window in case you want to follow along and use this sim. Then we'll be going to this URL and we'll be hitting the profiles option down here. There is a default one, you can quickly look at it, but we're going to be swapping this out in just a moment. So mouse over the trash bin and we're going to be deleting this and then swapping to the Glad stance setup. We'll be comparing this to dual wield, and most of the video is going to be about dual wield, but quickly go to settings. We're going to be modifying just a few things here and talking about how the DPS calculation works so that way you understand the comparisons. Right here, you're going to notice that we can see the base armor. It was at 3,700 before, but let's assume it's going to be really high. We'll set it at 7,000 in case they want to make it 50% more than Ragnaros. You know, Blizzard does really hate warriors being able to hit anything after all. You can notice here on the left that we're at 1,350 DPS. Let's click the stats panel and quickly look at how much of a percentage of our damage deep wounds is when you're Glad stance. Okay, now we can get into using dual wield. So delete that profile and we're going to upload the one for dual wield Fury. Then we're going to hit settings again. Let's check the DPS again, and wow, it's a lot higher, but don't worry, it's just because we didn't change the base armor. We're going to set it back at 7,000 and pretend that Blizzard hates us, since that's kind of what Phase 2 felt like for a lot of people, and then we'll resim it and we'll be able to see how much damage Dual Wield Fury does. It does a little bit less than Glad stance if the armor values are super high, and you can see the damage profile looks a little bit different here than a Glad stance build does too. But don't worry, we're actually going to show that Dual Wield Fury does beat Glad stance in just a few moments, but let's talk about what settings we have for the rotation. You can see we're using Heroic Strike literally all the time. We're not using any intelligence. We're using Hamstring as our filler for all of our extra globals, Execute whenever we're able to do it, Whirlwind whenever we're able to do it, and then finally here we have Slam. We're only going to use it when we have Blood Surge procs. And as for our activated buffs, we're going to use both the Enrages for Flagellation literally whenever. Just make sure that Flagellation isn't up. We're not simming with Recon because it's a little goofy. Death Wish we're using for the Execute phase. Same thing with our Mighty Rage potion. No one's going to be using this Irradiated Rejuve potion. This is what Consumed by Rage is set to. We're not doing any logic to it. And then Rampage when it's available. As for the grayed out buttons, we're not using Overpower, don't want to stance, not going to be using Sunder, we don't have the rune for it, and same deal with Rend, it just doesn't offer a lot of damage. Now, let's zoom out a bit and check out the bottom right quadrant of the screen. We're going to talk about runes. Shield Mastery is only good for Glad stance, Taste for Blood can be used in the two-handed ones, Vigilance isn't very good. Warbringers for PvP, don't need Raging Blow, Blood Frenzy sucks, Flagellation's awesome, you definitely need that. As for the wrist, Rampage is the best one. However, you can consider using Wrecking Crew. So let's quickly compare how much DPS you're going to lose if you decide to go with this. As you can see, we went to 1280 from about 1310, so you do lose DPS if you go with Wrecking Crew. Let's set it back to Rampage, and then we'll see again. We're at 1310-ish about DPS. Let's talk about the other runes. Single-Minded Fury, you need it. Can't use Quick Strike, can't use the Devastate one. The other ones, they're not very good. Endless Rage is okay. But for Waste, you definitely want to use Blood Surge. Let's go and talk about why Precise Timing isn't a great idea. You can see it's going to make you drop 100 DPS just about, which sounds kind of odd probably because it wasn't that punishing in the last phase, but let's talk about why that is the case, especially with a lot of armor on a boss. We're going to be spending a lot of rage for this rotation. We're using Heroic Strike literally all the time. The Hamstrings, they're kind of free because they can, you know, proc some Wind Furies for us, but the slams, you have to pay for them when you have Precise Timing, and we're probably spending a little bit too much rage when you have the Precise Timing rune instead of Blood Surge. You'll also get a few more slams off in total with Blood Surge, so that's the reason it's going to deck the other one. You can see we just tried to put on Titan Script there, but it doesn't work, we don't have it yet, so we're going to be using Consumed by Rage, and sadly our feat runes are totally useless unless you're going Glad stance, which does do excellent DPS of course. And you can see that there's some set effects we have with the current gear equipped, so we have some extra hits that we can do, and we also have a set effect from our weapons, which is pretty interesting stuff. We're going to be going to the settings panel in just a second, and we'll actually check out what gear we have equipped. A lot of this stuff is going to be a little difficult for you to get, especially early on. Many of these things are from Sunken Temple, or they're just random epics that are difficult to get your hands on. However, there are going to be items that have similar stats that you can get out of dungeons, and you could go a spec like Glad stance while you're gearing up. Dual Wield Fury is a little more reliant on gear than the other specs, but if you're geared, it does do the best. And some of the good news is a lot of these pieces are actually from quests anyways, so it's not a huge deal, you can get stuff. Speaking about how the other specs are comparable, let's go to profiles and we'll delete the dual wield one, and that way we can quickly compare it to the DPS of the other profiles. This is Glad Stance, 1880 DPS. Let's go back to profiles and then we'll go run dual wield Fury again. You're going to see that it does just a little bit more damage. Hit DPS again, 1910, about 30 more DPS. Sadly, the two-handed specs are a little more lackluster, but let's see how much they're doing. 1660 about. Quite a DPS decrease, but you might enjoy playing that. It could still be pretty good. And 1730 for an arms two-handed spec, so it beats the Fury two-hander just a little bit. We're going to go back to the dual wield spec now, and we're going to go check the idea of, well, how much is my DPS going to be affected by having less gear? Something that we talked about before was having rage constraints. Well, what would happen if we just used Heroic Strike more intelligently so that we don't have to worry about dropping consumed by rage? So what we'll do is we'll see, okay, if we do a few less Heroic Strikes with all the gear on, how does it affect our DPS? Only by a little. Okay, that's kind of a good sign. It makes me wonder if we put on worse weapons, what would happen? So let's check it out. We'll hit settings, we'll go up here. What items could you get? Thrash Blade, I bet you're familiar with that one. It's from a quest, so that should be no problem. What should we do for an offhand? A little bit harder to decide, but we'll just grab something that's really not all that special, and then we can get into simming this really quick. You might not be able to get this particular item, but the Sentinel's Blade doesn't have super exceptional stats. There's a lot of items that are similar, and we could see, wow, you only lost an additional 30 DPS by swapping to that. Kind of makes me wonder, though, was there a rage constraint ever? Ooh, kind of looks like maybe there wasn't. You only lost 20 DPS going from those really hard to get epic weapons to these, I don't want to say trash items. They're really good, but they're just not very hard to get. Interesting stuff. So I guess that this kind of means you're probably rage capped normally, and you just use the whirlwinds to go under the cap. These are all the specs that we've looked at, and now we have all of them compared side by side with the same armor settings. As you can see, they're not too different from each other, and if you like content like this, I have some videos off to the right that you can click so you can get some more information on Warrior. I like doing fast-paced videos. Click it. Click it now. Or they're gonna nerf us. You gotta show that you like Warrior content, or Blizzard isn't gonna care about you.